We're moving into our last panel before we break for dinner. The panel is called Trailblazing Women, Shaping Entrepreneurship in the Global South. We'll be talking about how women are catalysts for economic development and social transformation. They're breaking boundaries and building brighter futures for our communities. We have an esteemed panel before us. Joining us is Priscilla Gantonier, Program Officer, UNESCO Univoc, Bhuvan Bagga, Special Correspondent, South Asia Bureau, AFP India, Charlotte Rose, Founder and Director, North Star Australia, Patricia Smith, Sustainability Consultant, and moderated by Soline Kaufman, Co-Founder, Agora AI France. Thank you. Ms. Kaufman, over to you.
Well, good evening, everyone. This is the last session, so first of all, congratulations for making it through this first day. I know the different panels were super informative, sometimes challenging conversations, but always super interesting. I want to start by thanking ORF and the Thabo Mbeki Foundation for hosting us and providing an opportunity for different voices to express themselves. My name is Soline Kaufman, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this very important panel called Trailblazing Women, Shaping Entrepreneurship in the Global South. In this panel, we will explore the different challenges that women face on their entrepreneurial journeys, as well as elaborate on some of the solutions that can be put in place to help them. And before we jump in the conversation, I want to maybe start with a few remarks to celebrate the significant contributions that women entrepreneurs have to economic development and social transformation. Women entrepreneurs, they're not just mere business owners. They're very much catalysts for changes, and they're transformative powers behind economic growth for their communities and societies. According to International Finance Corporation, women in growing markets contribute up to 90% of their revenues towards their families and uplifting their communities. This highlights the critical role women play in building sustainable futures, specifically in the Global South. And in fact, if we're looking at women contribution in emerging markets, this contribution could add up to as much as $28 trillion in global GDP by 2025 if we enable women to have access to the same resources and opportunities as men. So this is a staggering figure that highlights the untapped potential of women entrepreneurs and the critical importance of sponsoring and supporting them in their entrepreneurial journeys. So how do we unlock this amazing opportunity, and how do we support women entrepreneurs? So there are key challenges that they're facing. We're not going to go through all of them this evening, of course, because dinner is waiting, but I want to maybe highlight a few of them. Cultural prejudices, limited access to entrepreneurial education, key skill sets, mentoring and network, and finally, the lack of specific funding. So we'll explore these different questions, and to start this discussion, I am very pleased and excited to introduce you to a panel. So we have Bhuvan Bagga, who's a special correspondent, South Africa Bureau, working for Agence France Presse. We have Priscilla Gattoni, Program Officer at UNESCO Univoc. We have Charlotte Rose, who's a founder and director of North Star, and finally, Patricia Smith, who's a sustainability consultant. So maybe let me start this panel by asking you one very simple yet interesting and challenging question. What or who is a woman entrepreneur? If you can describe that person in a few words. Maybe Priscilla, if you want to start.
Okay, thank you so much for this. It's such a great honor to be in this panel. if I think about the definition, I don't want to get into what an entrepreneur is, but we've had a lot of conversation on this. It's not clear who an entrepreneur is. But from the definition that we use from where I work, is that we look at a person who is able to change an idea into an opportunity, but focusing on the value. So what value do you provide in any kind of business that you're doing? So we have different schools of thoughts when it comes to this. It could be someone who is innovating something that you want to develop that is very fresh, that has never been seen before. Or it could be someone who is just buying products from Alibaba to come and sell in their neighborhood. This is a business owner. Or it could be someone who just sees what the neighbor is doing and they decide to start selling that. So we don't really try to get into the definitions, but at the end of the day, are you providing any value? What value are you adding? And are you able to create opportunities for other people as well as for yourself? So that is what I would conclude as an entrepreneur.
Maybe, Charlotte, in a few words, or one or two, can you describe what a woman entrepreneur is or who she is?
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting point you raise around value. I really find in this conversation, it's really important to note the paradox of women in leadership, period. So many of us recognize and so many of us have experienced that it is a complex position to be in as a woman in leadership. When we think leadership, there is a history of thinking about men. And actually, as women entrepreneurs, we have a huge responsibility not only to add value, but really to be change makers for the future of how it is leadership, period, is done. I actually had a touch of South Africa right before I got here. Trevor Noah was visiting Australia, an old friend of mine, and I loved the closing statement he had at his comedy show. He said, I hope to see a world in which women are running the world. And with that as a concept, I was left thinking, what is it that challenges so much in evolving where it is we're at to be in a position where all areas have women that are leading? And it is so exciting for us that the entrepreneurial space is a space where we are seeing huge growth of women in leadership. In Africa, 1 in 4. In China, 1 in 3. In India, 1 in 5. What it is to be a woman entrepreneur today, and I myself run my own business, it means you are everything at all times to your organization. You are the accountant, you are the marketing and sales, you are the CEO, you're the director, you are the customer services for all things, and really having to think about how is it I take a vision, irrespective of what area it is, and really evolve it into action and something that we can create followership, energy, and interest around. And I think it requires a huge amount of skills that I'm excited that hopefully we'll dive into today.
Patricia, maybe in a few words. I'm trying to get to a point here, and I'm noticing that nobody can give me a description of a woman entrepreneur in 2 or 3 words. So I'm taking you on this challenge now.
It is a challenge because everything is almost described so perfectly, but I can also say a woman has to be everything at all points in time. And creating value, I think, is very special to women, that they create a value for their community. They have children, so they have to think about their children. And I think that's a little bit what describes, in particular, a woman as an entrepreneur.
When you're the last.
Okay, thank you. I can't really add much to what you've said, but I'll add one thing. Women entrepreneurs today are relatively rare breed. And that speaks not to their capability or ability, that speaks more to the system that we have, structures that we have that are put in place. So you're describing about what they need to be, which is same as what men in the field have also got to be, but for you, you are relatively rare because you've got more hurdles to jump and more hoops to take care of. That's how I see it.
Yes, so a woman entrepreneur can be your sister, your mother, your aunt, fine. It could be someone who's working in the farming industry, in the biotech industry. So there are many, many ways of looking at women entrepreneurs in different areas and different industries. And I think it's important to see that it's not just this unicorn figure and that anyone and everyone can be a woman entrepreneur. I want to move towards the notion of perception and specifically how perception in different cultures can either hinder or can accelerate an entrepreneurial journey for women. Bhuvan, you've been traveling the world, and you've been seeing different cultures and different communities. Can you touch a little bit on that point, on how different cultures and perceptions of women can either accelerate their journey or hinder it?
I think I'll start with my home, India itself. India itself's got 1.4 billion people. And one issue that you see in India across is that you can talk about finance, access to finance, you can talk about government policies, and you can talk about different issues when it comes to promoting women in the field. But till the time you address something which is fundamental, which is actually at the root of a lot of these issues, is the way society is structured on the ground, the way people in the villages think, the way people in the small towns think about what women needs to be or what women ought to do in a day-to-day basis or in the field. Till the time you can address those issues, you can't really talk about you can talk about these issues simultaneously, but you can't really expect something organic to come out of it. If you want a full chain of women coming out in the field and organically building institutions, building companies in the long run and self-sustaining them, you need to address some of the issues which have got nothing directly to do with business, nothing directly to do with laws or the challenges that women have to face when it comes to accessing finance or having legacy networks where they can rely and bank on knowledge or ideas that other women may be able to share. It's got to do with the fact that a woman in a village needs to, or in a city needs to be able to travel safely alone to a longer distance. It needs to address to the fact that a woman doesn't just have to be bound and tied inside her home, and that village or that home remains or is her entire world. And I mean, till the time more women are able to go out freely, move within villages, within cities, within towns, and interact with other women, you won't really have an organic flow of ideas or organic flow of thoughts that could actually be built into even small local level companies or local level businesses, which is ultimately what grows into a bigger business for men.
And how do we change that? How do we change those perceptions or those cultural norms? Have you seen some successful examples of practices being put in place, or is it done organically?
I think as a journalist and basing it on the stories that I've seen across India or across the region generally, you're talking about Global South, and I'm guessing a lot of those stories are similar, is governments need to ensure at the grassroots level, I'm not talking at the top, maybe even at the top, but at the grassroots level certainly, get more women out, whether it's through political processes, whether by ensuring that they participate in the local democratic processes, contest in it. Like in India, you've got in villages, village heads are women. Like when the entire process started, when the government mandated that women be elected, that only women can be village heads in different areas, initially people found a way around that. Like in most cases, it was ultimately husbands or fathers or brothers who were running the show. Women were basically placeholders, signing the papers and signing the dotted line wherever they were told to. But the idea behind it was good. So gradually over a period of 5, 6, 7, 10 years, even out of 100, if you had 15, 20 women actually realizing that they have been given power and they have now more access to ideas, people, sources, and networks, they managed to step up and take the mantle. So that is how you actually bring change. So you had, and those 20 women or those 15 women were actually the ones who inspired others who did not have to just look at a reservation or a affirmative action to come into a place. They had somebody to look forward to. So that is how I think you ultimately change a society. And since those changes have brought women out, in many cases, those changes have also ensured that women managed to find their own networks, and those networks gave them ideas.
And beyond perception, maybe if we move towards education, because you can change perceptions by providing role models and changing certain instances of governance, but education also plays a key role, right, in empowering women. So Priscilla, I know that UNESCO Univoc is deeply involved in promoting skill development and vocational training. So in your experience, what type of specific skills or training do we need to provide for women entrepreneurs to be successful?
Thank you for that. So there's this perception that entrepreneurship, you don't need to get trained. They say entrepreneurs are born. You just wake up and start doing something, selling something. And I try to compare this to running a marathon. You know, it's just a matter of putting one leg in front of the other and letting the wind do the magic, right? Until you actually get on the ground. So the ground things are very different. You'll start feeling your spleen wants to burst. You have like blood rushing on your head. And soon enough, you start to analyze and to understand that it's not a matter of just starting something, especially in a marathon. You have to, it's a game change. It's about the mindset. It's about perseverance. It's about not giving up. It's planning. It's working hard every day to improve. So when you think about skill development when it comes to entrepreneurship and women, I'm going to talk about 3 key points that I perceive as very important. And we're going to look at technical and vocational education and training. This is the area that I work on. And if you look around you, we say everything that you see today has actually been done by someone who is technically trained. The chairs that you're sitting on were welded by someone. So basically when you think about technical and vocational education and training, especially in the Global South, we see that a lot of our economies are around 80% in the informal market. So if you look at the nexus, what we've been talking about, the just and dual transition. So we're seeing different levels of enterprises that come up. So we're talking about the green and sustainability enterprises. We're talking about the digital enterprises, as well as the social enterprises. So if you think about who are the drivers of this, you'll find that we still have a big gap when it comes to women entrepreneurs. And when am I saying this? Recently, LinkedIn actually published a report talking about the number of green skills that are available. So if you look at 10 women, it's only 1 woman has a green skill. And you think about where we are headed. In 2030, we are talking about moving into this dual transition, and we're seeing that women don't have the green skills that are needed to transition into climate-efficient ways. Then we talk about digital skills. There's a huge gap. We're talking about digital divide. I'm not even going to get into that because that has been discussed profoundly in these sessions. So when we look at this, we go back and understand what are the skill mismatch that we're seeing, what are the things that we need to train our students as well as the grown-ups when it comes to development. So technical vocational education means that you gain a skill that is technical in a way that if you're able to understand how to lay this carpet, you will be able to formulate and come up with ideas on how to make it an enterprise and develop something out of it. So this is key when it comes to entrepreneurship. What we're seeing today is that a lot of women don't have these technical skills because of that gap, and it comes back to training. So we're seeing many women are not getting into STEM courses. And of course, there's a bad perception, as my colleague has said here, bad perception when it comes to how do I join a technical school? And these technical schools are something that you'll not find in universities. These are people who train on very short courses to be able to just answer to the labor market. So these are the key things. The second point is about confidence, self-efficacy, and agency. So a lot of women, because of these stereotypes that have been happening, you'll find that someone who has no level of digital or green skill, they're not going to innovate in that space. So you're only captured to innovate or to do business within the knowledge that you have. So you end up finding a lot of women, if you walk in the streets of Nairobi, where I come from, or Accra, or even Kampala, all the women, you'll see them, they're selling bread, they're selling these small businesses that, of course, are known not to be as lucrative as something that is more technical. So this is the difference that we see between the enterprises that are run by men and women. So it comes back to what is the problems, this confidence. And this is actually started from the way we go. So the inequalities you see in the labor market today, they started in school. So the lack of confidence is because for many years, women and girls have been told, this is what you're supposed to do. Don't think about technical, don't be too technical, do something that is easier. And this is what we're missing, because the future is going to be digital and technical, and we don't have enough women doing that. So at the end of the day, self-confidence, to be able to actually have the agency to do something towards it, it becomes a problem. Then the other activity that we see that women enterprises need a lot is networking and mentorship. You talked about role models, and this is a key point, because you can only, if you can visualize what you want to become in future, you start working on it. If you visualize yourself as an entrepreneur, you start thinking about who else is an entrepreneur. We don't have an equivalent of Elon Musk for a woman. When you think about it, and you just want to say, so when I grew up personally in Kenya, The only visualization I had or role modeling was the women that worked. They worked in the market, selling groceries and all that. So in my mindset, I already think that entrepreneurship is limited to selling groceries and other things. So basically we see that when we don't have role models who are women, who are working on entrepreneurship, especially in the technical fields, we are limited to really advancing in that area, and we end up doing small jobs and etc. At the same time, networking. We have these networking groups, and this is a skill. Networking is a skill itself. We see that a lot of businesses are not closed in the boardrooms, as we know. They're closed in a 9-hole golf course activity or a networking like this today. So you don't go and sit down and wait for a boardroom meeting for that to be convened. We don't have enough women who are playing golf, for example. We don't have them. And even the ones that we have, they end up sitting together as a woman group. So we have women in boards, women in enterprises, women in ITC, women in this, and we miss out on the men. So we end up not getting a lot of knowledge when it comes to peer learning, exchange of knowledge, getting opportunities. And at the end of the day, the men don't understand the needs that we need as women when it comes to entrepreneurship. And at the same time, we end up not doing anything. So in terms of training, and I'm going back to your question, in terms of training, these are the critical aspects that we see. Entrepreneurship does not mean that once you learn to become an entrepreneur, you must start a business. No, entrepreneurship is about a mindset. You're able to learn critical skills that are transferable to any kind of activity that you want to do. When you have that mindset, you're able to quickly move into a business. Even if you're employed, you have so many agile masters. This is an entrepreneurial mindset. And this is what we train, and this is why it's important for all women to have this entrepreneurial mindset.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And you touched a little bit upon, the topic of leadership. And you spoke about, vocational training and having the technical skills. But I want maybe to delve a little bit more into the leadership aspect of things. Charlotte, you've advised and supported different leaders across the public, civil sector, as well as the private sector. Now you're having a leadership consultancy activity. Can you tell us a bit more about the soft skill sets that are required, and if leadership for women is something that needs to be learned or something that is intrinsic and needs to be exposed?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. Priscilla, you've done such a good job on the base of what we see. There are specific things. We just had Alta Manjani up here talking about the importance of skilling and reskilling, and I can't stress this enough. Even in the entrepreneurial space, there are foundations that won't change. There are things that we have to continue to evolve with. And when we think about it, the very first thing that comes to mind as you ask the question, I was delivering some training in March in India. There was a room full of women, and I asked them all to raise a hand if they identified somebody in their world that they recognized would be a great role model, somebody that they were fascinated by or interested in, that they thought they could learn from. Everybody raised a hand. I asked the group then, could you please keep your hand up if you have approached any of those role models or leaders to ask for help, for mentorship? Not one hand in the room. And so when we look at it, the first thing with respect to network is it is more challenging across cultures and communities for women by the way that we socialize, by the way that we connect, by the access that we have, and the culture norms that go with it. You take some cultures, India pops to mind, where there are norms about what is acceptable or not acceptable for you as a woman as well to be connecting in with, the purpose of your connections. It's really important, I think, from the outset that we think about how are we upskilling the thinking around approach to uptaking opportunities and really leveraging them. So how do you build a network? To this point around self-efficacy, it can't be understated, right? We aren't going to get the job done through others. We need to make sure that we are positioning ourselves. I spoke to several VC funds before coming here to ask, why is there a gap? We know that 1 in 4 women, for example, in Africa, is an entrepreneur. We see sub 7% of VC funding going into women. It is I think, approximately 2% in the US, and it's about 1% in Europe. It is not unique to this region. It's not unique to the global south. It's a global issue. But there is a challenge with that. And so when I work with women, one of the key questions that I have is, how are you positioning yourself and how do you communicate and discuss who it is you are and what it is you do? Patricia and I had a conversation even before we came up here today. How many women struggle to say, I'm an entrepreneur and this is what I do and this is what I believe in and this is why it is I believe you should back me over any other? It is not a natural way of communicating for women. So, really getting into mindset, confidence building is absolutely essential. I was at an accelerator event in Australia that I was running sales training. And one of the key questions I was asking them is, how can you introduce yourself in a way that really communicates your belief in your business first and foremost, and your belief in yourself? When we look at VCs, they are investing not just in the business, they're investing in founders. And so how are you positioning yourself as a woman leader, recognizing you sit in a leadership paradox? So I think they're core things. I have sort of 5 skill sets that I really consider important beyond that. The first is communication. So, when we look at it, there are strategies behind how you sell effectively. There are strategies behind how you pitch. There are strategies for how it is you think about your marketing. If you are somebody that is very removed perhaps from urban environments, how can you leverage digital and technological platforms in order for you to have a greater reach? That all requires thought process, it requires exposure, and it requires some level of training. So making sure that that is available is incredibly important. Vision and strategy. It doesn't matter how big the corporation is. I've done a lot of work with leaders on strategy. And so certainly if you've not been exposed to that, how do we make sure that you have the ability to really think through what is going to be my approach with thought, so that it's not just I woke up and I thought today maybe I'll try getting this product out there. And then particularly from a leadership perspective, there are the soft and the hard skills. So, as we grow, as we scale, we've got to think about how do we, as women, also inspire followership, and particularly inspire followership in some cases, in some communities, in men that we need to have as part of that conversation. So really thinking about engagement, thinking about how it is you establish yourself as a point of inspiration with clear vision, clear communication, clear purpose is incredibly important. The ability to relate to others, the ability to relate to your market becomes incredibly important. And then aside that, the practicalities of, as I'm growing, I'm probably taking on more responsibilities than I necessarily have skill for in all areas. How do I make sure that I am managing my time? How do I recognize with self-awareness where it is I have strength and where I don't? And that's a really important conversation and question as well for entrepreneurs. We have the tech and the digital, and you've spoken to that already, so I'm not going to labor the point, but we're in the 4th industrial revolution. If we don't get a handle on equipping women with technological, with digital skills at this point in time, the gap is only going to broaden. So, that's incredibly important. And then I spoke to one business owner who sits across several businesses. His background's finance. I mean, it's a huge advantage if you understand the mechanics of finance for your business, and that's not something that we have typically and historically trained women in. So really making sure that the aspect of actual business management is something that you understand as well is really critical. And I'd say if you can get across those, no small feat, but if you can get across those, you have a standing chance of becoming very competitive in your landscape. But you do need to have a handle on all those areas in order to sustain, knowing that many entrepreneurs will go under in their first couple of years without having that robust and congruent sort of thought process towards maintaining a business that works.
Amazing. And I want to maybe shift the conversation a little bit, because I see that we're running on schedule, but slightly out of time. Patricia, you're an entrepreneur. You've been building different sustainable supply chains in India, notably for your sustainable businesses. And I'm curious maybe to have your thoughts, knowing that we're speaking about the Global South, where environment and social development are so important and so linked. how can women entrepreneurs, build sustainable businesses that are going to be helpful for their communities? Are there specific business models that need to be, designed for it? And how do they get support, specifically financial support?
Thank you so much for your question. And yes, I know the fashion world. I worked with a lot of small, actually women in India on the ground, craftsmen, craftswomen, farmers. And I brought an example today, and also I wanted to start or first touch on the point that Ravi Arora made today. And he said we need to create local ecosystems where we link farmers. For example, for me, looking at the farming sector of cotton, we need to be able to create platforms and have organizations on the ground for each village that has different needs. We spoke about it before. Each village has a different language. Each village has a different need. And if we can't, also as Bhuvan mentioned, if we can't empower these villages, men and women, we're also not going to empower women. Sustainability, a whole nother part. So that was for me very important. And then what legislation, since there's so many policymakers maybe here, legislation is a very important part that can give these communities a better standing, and also the companies that are buying into cotton, for example, from India, they need to be able to have in mind the sustainability and the soil health, the human health, which then also comes from bottom up. We cannot, we cannot have any entrepreneurs as women or in that whole sector if we don't look as a company from bottom up and looking at these people in those remote villages. And when looking at a specific example of regenerative agriculture, I found that you can give women a whole nother purpose, because there's so many more works that are all of a sudden coming upon. And there was an example of one woman, and she was actually taking these seeds that were provided by this organization, and she was, preparing them because they're GMO free, and she was preparing them in a certain way, and then she opened up her little shop. So I found that was a wonderful example of how actually you can be an entrepreneur in the best sense, starting from cult or making those seeds, preparing them before they will be cultivated. Of course, coming also to the digital skills, we need to support them, and organizations can be the connector, or NGOs on the ground. So we need to enforce that women get the education they need, the farmers get the education they need, and through digital skills, maybe we can figure out a way, if they can't read or write, to have digital or technology functions in place where they can actually learn by looking at a video instead of having to read something.
Amazing. And I saw, Bhuvan, you wanted to jump in.
I'll just add one point here. I mean, I mentioned political change, which may not really be easy in many cases. But since we're talking about global south, and budgets and finances are always an issue, you're talking about developing countries. So, there are ways countries like India has tried to do that. Financially incentivize women getting engaged in the community by some policies which do not take a lot of investment. Like, I can just give you one example. Indian government some time back launched a scheme where they said they would train about 15,000 women to fly drones, and they have already trained several dozen, or I guess a few hundred women have been trained already. And these women now are quote unquote drone pilots in rural areas, and after learning these drone skills, they are being employed and being hired by their local farmers and villages to spray pesticides and insecticides. They can do it more effectively because they've been taught how to fly drones, and government has specifically taught them, given them the equipment, and giving them relative subsidies, etc. So it's financially useful for farmers to go and now hire these women, and these women are also offering their services. So some of these women in an age group of 18 to 56, who in their past had never really stepped out of their homes, now with their families, seeing the financial incentive of them learning this skill, and then they could possibly earn a lot of cash which can come back to the home, come back to economy, local economy. They are going out, they are forming networks, and they are giving their services. So at some level, they are doing their own, they're running their own businesses, maybe in local villages, going from one place to other, or one town to other, and offering these services. So those are the changes that you can look at in Global South, where, and these don't even take a lot of money. Money is always an issue when you're talking about developing countries. And this also brings meaningful change.
That's amazing. I'd like to open maybe the conversation to the audience. If you have any questions, maybe we'll take 2 or 3 quick fire shots. If you can go to the mic and introduce yourself and ask your question. Thanks.
I don't think it's turned. It is. Hello, my name is Vaja. I'm from Georgia, and I would like to ask a question to Charlotte, if I may. Could you elaborate more about the the concept of entrepreneurs being as an active citizens, activists? How do you see that trend? And could you underline some of the positive and negative aspects of this concept? Thank you.
Maybe I'll take maybe another one. I see someone else, and then we can just wrap the answers together.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for the amazing panel discussion. So I am Gugulethu Letsimpilo Mjali from Echoes of 76 and Iron Consulting. So I am a female entrepreneur. And my business is focused on SDG 4. And I thought that would be great because I do want to make sure that I make an impact. My question to Priscilla is that while addressing the challenges, such as the limited resources and the systematic inequalities, how do I make sure that the business stays sustainable beyond 2030 and is a business that can go beyond borders, beyond South Africa and to the rest of the world, focusing on SDGs? Thank you.
Solim, can I pose a question?
Yes, of course. Let's take 3.
My question would be that, it's a wonderful conversation, so thank you for that discussion. But my question here is that there's, how many men look up to women as icons in entrepreneurship and in business leadership? I think that's a good question to think about. And to juxtapose this with the second question, how many men look up to women political leaders as icons? And suddenly you'll see a very different universe emerge. So men would have political leadership, women political leaders, men would look up to them, Indira Gandhi in India, Margaret Thatcher in UK, Golda Meir in Israel, and many others. So women political leaders are able to attract followership, the word many of you use today, men followership. Women business leaders are unable to. I have not done a survey, so I don't know whether this is true, but I think this might be accurate. Why do you think that? Why is it that when it comes to the business of politics, women seem to be doing better than in the politics of business?
Amazing. Charlotte first, a few words, then Patricia, and maybe Bhuvan, if you want to take the last question. Amazing.
Okay, perfect. There are 2 really important questions raised. So the first around our responsibility, and it is a responsibility to be active citizens. I think there's twofold. Is one, we are responsible for driving change within our communities in the businesses that we enact. This whole concept of value, I really like it. I really think that is the question we need to be asking ourselves. And if I think about it, the other side of it is to become role models, to challenge status quo. We do have a bit of a challenge when it comes to a cultural norm where, as of today, the role of women in society has not been on par. It was only 50 years ago that women in America could apply for credit independently, a mortgage independently. 50 years ago. That's my mother's generation. So if we think about it, I'm hugely inspired to see that 42% of entrepreneurs in the US are women as of today. This tells us that it's totally feasible with change of legislation, change of regulation, that we can really move the dial in the entrepreneurial and private sector space. There are huge things happening across Africa and Asia that I've been observing, and hugely inspired by that. We need to continue to agitate what it is that we accept as normal. There's this amazing company called Witchsea in Silicon Valley. I don't know if you heard about them, but essentially in 2011, they had enough of being disregarded by the investor community when they were asking for appointments and meetings. They invented a co-founder. They made up a co-founder under the name of Keith, and we're shocked to find that he was getting meetings and responses quicker than they were. So, this is not a historic issue. It's a contemporary issue that needs to continue to be challenged. Samir, you're asking about why is it we're seeing a little bit of a difference in followership in the political and business spheres? That is a question I would actually throw out for everybody to consider here. Are there biases that we need to examine? Are there biases that we need to challenge as women in leadership positions? Whether you're Alta Manjani, who sat here today, you're minister in presidency that sat here today, what is it on the side of women? Not only in government, but also in business, that we need to be challenging status quo around. I watched last night Gillian Gillard, again, the speech that she gave the Parliament in Australia, when she said, enough is enough, I'm not going to continue to engage in conversations, and it's not my responsibility here to really be looking at sexism and holding that conversation. There needs to be some self-reflection on perhaps unconscious biases that exist. And within the private sector, we can continue to lobby and seek out a change and adjustment, in representation. So in venture capital funds, can we have greater representation? Can we hold venture capital funds to greater accountability around the organizations that they are investing in? Gender Lens Investing is doing a fantastic job of really spotlighting organizations that can be invested in. We can push the dial and request more. So I think that's really important for us to consider. And in the side of business, it is continuing an open dialogue. It's not just women that are going to have a problem, but what is most popular at the moment in the entrepreneurial space for women is for us to be entering that space in our 30s. We are going to see with Gen Z and the very realities of our ability to enter the housing market or to have assets. There is a requirement to have side hustles. There is a requirement to be entrepreneurial in the way we're thinking. So we're going to start to see intersectionality of not only the challenges of being women in leadership and in entrepreneurial spaces, but young women in leadership and in the entrepreneurial space.
Thanks.
If we can't get a seat at the table, if we can't get credit conversations, if we can't get investment at this point, how does that get easier when we start adding the complexities of being a young woman at the table?
Thank you,
And
Charlotte.
So this is one thing
I want
I
us
just
to wrap up.
encourage.
Maybe just to jump on this, Bhuvan, if you want to follow up on the conversation and
I'll just take Sameer's point on why women are trusted in politics and not necessarily in business. I think it once again goes back to the fundamental, where in India, for instance, most women politicians that they've got huge following, they are seen as mother, protective mother, elder sister and all of that. And same at home, you go for protection, love, care to your mother and all. But at the end of the day, traditionally, historically, when it comes to money, you've trusted your money with the father, or father comes up with the money. The same is happening in business and in politics. I think that's, in my understanding, somewhat answers.
Okay,
Last
just
words
quickly
for
to
you.
answer the question about SDG 4. So if your business is about SDG 4, which is focusing on inclusive, affordable, and quality education, I can assure you that many countries are still lagging behind on that. We have a GEM report that was published this year for UNESCO that really says that a child who's born today will need 97 years for them to actually see gender equality in education happen. So basically, we are still lagging behind on that, and we need a lot of work to be done. So in terms of sustainability, if you have this at the back of your mind, there's still a lot of opportunities beyond 2030 when the SDGs are supposed to actually come to a conclusion. But we're seeing so many challenges that need to be addressed, and please continue doing that, because we need to have less of these conversations here. If we had gender parity, if we had quality education, a lot of these problems that we're discussing today will not be there. All the best.
I want to stop here. I mean, I love the end of this conversation, so I won't add anything more. I want to thank the audience again for the different questions and for sticking with us, and thank the ORF and the Thabo and Becky Foundation again for hosting us. Have a good evening, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you. If I could request my panelists to join us at the front of the stage while I make a few housekeeping announcements. We'll break for dinner now and meet back here at 9:30. We have an exciting panel. We have drinks. Grab some dinner, get back here, and have a fun conversation with an amazing set of panelists.